quorum.
We've formed a quorum. Let's continue with our meeting or our hearing. We've just formed a quorum. Ellen, it's now your turn. Thank you, Chairman. In relation to the number of UBWs, really the number is very large. The administration has two policies to deal with those. The first is called the Minor Works Control System. The other one is in Chapter 4, and that is the large-scale operations, LSOs. They hope that through these two measures, the great number of UBWs can be removed. Chapter 4 is on LSOs. I would like to discuss that. I have some questions in that chapter for the controlling officers. Page 34 in the Chinese version. In paragraph 4.3, the LSOs have been set out. The first batch was conducted in 2010, and then 2011, 2012, and 2013. 5 LSOs were launched. There are 39 consultancy contracts involving $35.6 million. The results of the audit showed that the effectiveness of the large-scale operations is far from satisfactory. If you look at paragraph 4.5, some members have already mentioned this. For LSO1, carried out in 2010, it was taken charge of by the building staff, covering 101 buildings. The building has set a target of completing the LSO by March 2012. That is more than 3 years ago. However, audit examination reviewed that up to October 2014, actions on only 42 buildings have been completed. So remaining 59 buildings were yet to be completed. If you look at the LSOs undertaken by consultancies, 4.3a, Roman letter 2, and BCDE, you found a host of problems there. May I refer you to paragraph 4.6 and also table 3. The problems there are clear. Table 3 shows us very clearly that for LSO2, starting from LSO2, in the middle, action up to action progress as of October 2014. Compliance inspection stage, action up to second compliance inspection stage. LSO3, LSO4, and LSO5. Even for LSO3, 14 action in survey stage. And LSO5, 104 buildings, action in survey stage. Overall, the progress has lagged behind the schedule and the results are not good. The audit report also highlights certain problems. If you look at table 4, premature payments, consultancy A and C, there are premature payments made for these two consultants. Para 4.12b, it says that for consultancy C, the completion letter was issued only after the final payment was made. So we're really putting the cart before the horse. So, Director of Buildings, can you tell us, for these LSOs, the results were not what you expected. What will you do to catch up with the delays? The Director, starting from 2012, the LSOs have been targeted at rooftop podium lane UBWs. In the LSO2, we have engaged a consultant to undertake the work. In studying the progress of LSOs, with the benefit of hindsight, I think we have underestimated the difficulties. Generally, we've allowed 9 months to 1 year for the consultants to complete the work. Looking at the up-to-date progress, you see that there have been various delays to the LSOs. I have mentioned a reason before. If we want to actually gain access to these UBWs, we have to get into the premises, and we encounter some difficulties in doing that. We've reminded colleagues and the consultants that they should come up with a better estimate on the completion date. If we think that the targeted completion date is not achievable, then they should tell us so. As to whether the results were what we expected, we can't count on only the BD staff to do the work because it involves a lot of manpower. So we've been hiring the consultants to help us. I think there are merits to it. But then we must step up supervising their work, the consultants' performance, and also remind colleagues that in collaborating, working together with the consultants, they should do a better job. Chairman, your answer will only lead the PAC to come up with some harsh conclusions. Chairman, Director, you should understand this. You've been stating clearly that you are short of manpower in dealing with rooftop, podium lane, UBWs, and SDFs, and that is why you have signed 39 consultancy agreements for 5 LSOs. But at least the buildings department should supervise these consultants. Table 4 in page 39 in the Chinese version, for example, consultancy A. The final payment date is the 6th of March 2014. So that means you have paid them in full. But then the audit examination shows that on the 15th of April 2015, the consultant submitted one of the second compliance inspection report. 2nd September 2014, BD issued a completion letter. 15th of December 2014, BD endorsed the second compliance inspection report. In simple terms, you made the final payment before you received and accepted the report, and before you issued a completion letter. If you couldn't provide good justification, then our conclusion could only be that you were poor in your monitoring work and you were not doing a proper supervision of the workflow process. Consultancy A, it has to deal with 45 target buildings. The last one of the 45, the details have been listed in 4.12, paragraph A and note 24. And it gives details on this final building, the last building, the difficulties encountered in handling that particular building. In 2011, the owner had lodged an appeal. So that's why there is unforeseen delay in the follow-up work. In 2012, the appeal ended. The consultant attempted to to gain access to the premises, but failed to do so. And the appeal was ended, and we tried to follow up duly, and the consultant tried to gain access to the premises. Now, if you look at the conditions in terms of the agreement, if the consultant had completed the second compliance inspection, even if we could not gain access to the premise and tell us so, then we could consider their work completed. For this particular case, because there is just this one last building among the 45 where we had encountered difficulties. So at that time, in early 2014, we considered the contract or the agreement completed, and we made the final payment. As regards the completion letter, that was a requirement in the contract, and that was a formality. I think there might be room for improvement in how we handled the case. With regard to the accounting practices, we had already made some adjustments. And that is, if we were to make requests for final payment to the accounting staff, and the accounting staff didn't see any completion dates being put in the request, then payment would not be made. Now, so what has happened to consultancy A and C won't recur. I think that was some reason for what has happened to consultancy A and C.
Chairman, I'm happy to hear from the director that there will not be repeats of such cases. According to the director, the answer seemed to be that the consultancy terms allow them to do so. I have not read the contract myself, so can the director provide a copy of such contract so we can judge for ourselves whether or not it should be allowed? The PAC would look at paragraph 4.4 under paragraph 41 to see what are included under the consultancy contracts. But for stages A and D, it's a little bit different from what the director said. So maybe it's a case of miscommunication between the secretary and director. They mentioned a survey stage, audit serving stage, compliance inspection stage, and a final stage. the table 4 I asked about, in that case, it's very clear that the final stage, D, has been finished and all the some stages have been completed. But the director said it's not the case. In some cases, inspectors can make the payment as well, and I was surprised to hear that. So if you can provide a copy of the consultancy contracts, you can make things clearer for us. So is the witness willing to provide this document? Yes, we are happy to provide a copy of the contracts. For the main duties of the consultants listed in 4.4, I'd like to clarify something. The survey stage is a crucial stage, and it consists of 30% of the costs. And the audit serving stage makes up 20% of the costs. And the compliance inspection stage is further divided into 2 phases, and they each make up 20% of the costs. So A to C together make up 95%. And once all paperwork is ready, we will pay the remaining 5%. And it represents completion of the contract. Technically speaking, there's room for improvement with the formalities for consultancy C. From our records, they have completed all the works in the previous stages, and the only thing missing was a completion letter. We admit that technically speaking, this was not satisfactory. So going forward, we hope to streamline our accounting procedures to avoid any repeats in the future. Ellen? I understand that we can ask further questions of the audit report. This morning, we have mainly heard from the Director of Buildings, and he told us his pledges and commitments, including refining the accounting procedures, consolidating the offices in order to prevent miscommunications, and RFID would be utilized. And he would also optimize the priorities for actionable UBWs, and he would disclose more information and so on. So I'd like to invite the Director of Buildings to give the PAC a hand. Can you give us a list? I'm quite sure the government won't do anything about the existing policy. So under these circumstances, from a value for money perspective, can you tell the PAC what measures would you introduce to instill confidence among our members on the government's policy? So is the controlling officer willing to provide such a list? Yes, Chairman, we are happy to provide in writing a list of works we have completed. You promised to give us a copy of the contracts. In the contracts, did you stipulate the payment procedures? We are talking about certified payment. So you should have procedures in place to stipulate when the payments should be made. This should be included in the contracts. If it's not included, can you can you advise us on your internal payment guidelines? Out of these consultancies, did you always pay upfront before their works are completed? According to Table 4, it's a big problem. The completion letter is only issued after a year. Even the Architectural Services Department wouldn't do it this way. The Housing Department wouldn't do it this way. So why is it that the Buildings Department pays upfront? If this is not listed under the contracts, please share with us your internal guidelines. Alan, it's time. I'll wait for the next round. Paul? Can you wrap up this item today? Members have spoken on this issue from multiple perspectives. If we still have time, I'd like to do a mock-up to clean up some of the remaining items. Earlier this morning, I mentioned that the department has certain measures to remove UBWs, and one of these tools is to issue a removal order. And the government would commission certain contractors to carry out the removal, and they would pay them back. So I'd like to look into that. In paragraph 5.35, there are 9 conditions for issuing a removal order. There are 5 conditions. We have mentioned names like C.Y. Leung and Henry Tang. Under 5.35, condition A is that the owner, condition A lays out the conditions under which the removal orders can be complied. And A is that a UBW owner having excusable reasons for not complying with the removal orders and so on. And condition B, a UBW posing a risk to life or limb or causing public nuisance. Condition C, a highly publicized case, as I mentioned. D, a highly political case. Or E, a UBW involving a blatant breach of the law. For example, reconstruction of the UBW after its removal. When we look at C and E, for the cases of these 2 persons I mentioned, they might be highly correlated. For those 2 cases, the government did not commission any contractors to remove the UBWs. Can you confirm if this is correct? Chairman. Sometimes the BD would carry out removal orders on behalf of the owners. We have not seen a lot of these cases in the past few years when compared with prosecutions from 2009 to 2013. We only carried out 130 for such removal works, because a lot of manpower and time would be involved. So under 5.35, default works would be carried out only under special circumstances. For condition C and D, for highly publicized or political cases, they are completely relevant. During the investigation stage, for these high-profile cases, we would carry the investigation out as soon as possible to ease public doubts. But for the latter stages of our work, they are completely the same. I think the words highly publicized case might not be very succinct, but in Gen 11, we we have made it clear in our guidelines, and these cases refer to cases of social interest. If they are not tackled as soon as possible, things might get complicated. That's as simple as it is. I'd like to give an example of set of default works which might meet these conditions. Last year, in certain streets in Shamshui-Po, in some private roads, there are drainage blockages underneath those streets, and the problem could not be completely solved despite our best efforts. And since the owners of 14 blocks were affected, and the owners reflected to the buildings department as well as the district council, and they wanted the government to intervene and help solve the problem. There might not be hygiene issues involved because those were only intermittent problems. But since a large number of people were involved and the owners could not do something quickly, and as such we decided to carry out default works in order to minimize the negative impacts of the UBWs. And the works have almost been completed. For the 9 conditions for prosecution, the UBWs are given different priorities. I'm talking about 5.25. The first 3 items are high priority, the next 3 medium priority, and the last 3 low priority. For items G, prosecution of a UBW owner may have immediate influence on other owners to remove their UBWs in their vicinity. In other words, to set an example. On one hand, we don't want the scope of the removals to be too wide, but at the other, we understand that some leeway must be given, but we do receive a lot of complaints that certain owners would be forced to remove their UBWs first. I've never heard any complaints from Henry Tang. But if this case is not of political nature, then he might not be prosecuted so soon. So, so the government was not following the guidelines, and at the same time, some people feel that the government is trying to bully certain owners, and as such, they might be dissatisfied. So, in terms of the 9 prosecution conditions and the 5 default works criteria, can you commit to comply with them as much as you can? Can you answer the questions specifically? Under 5.25, for the 9 prosecution criteria, the first 3 criteria are more serious conditions. And we would follow up closely with these cases. For example, a UBW associated with a residential subdivided flat in an industrial building, or if a UBW blocks the means of escape and so on, we would follow up on these cases very closely. For B, it's the same. If a UBW would pose serious hazard to life and limb, then it would be of high priority to us. But again, since we have to deal with such a large number of cases, we would have to assess each case on a case-by-case basis. It's the same for default works. If we are to carry out default works, we must first commission a consultant to come up with a proposal, and the consultant can then work with our contractor. It's no easy work. So under paragraph 5.35, we stress that these works would only be carried out under special circumstances. Otherwise, compared with podium UBWs, if we turn to default works every time, we have to apply for closure orders from the court so that we can remove all the residents inside. We have recently done it for subdivided flats in Chunwan. We applied for an order from the court, and government-appointed contractors were mobilized to deal with the default works. So we are indeed following the guidelines. When you look at 5.25, the director said the three cases meeting criteria A, B, or C would be given high priority. A is UBW associated with a residential subdivided flat, and B, UBW posing serious hazard to life and limb, etc. I understand that you will follow up on these cases closely. For Mr. Tang's case, it doesn't fit any of the criteria A to C. So the impression is that some people would criticize the government for tackling UBW cases that don't fall under A to C but are of political or publicized nature. So does it mean that these two criteria of high publicity or highly political case are more important than those criteria A to C? With regards to cases of high-profile individuals, we would expedite the process. So everyone should be equal in front of the law, right? So why are you treating high-profile cases differently? I understand the need to have criteria A to C, but if a case does not fall under either of those criteria, why are you doing it differently? Director? Chairman? On UBWs by high-profile individuals, a lot of discussions were made at that time, including discussions at LegCo. My understanding is that such cases would be of high public interest. For the owners and enforcement agencies, the sooner we can clarify the issue, the better, and it's also beneficial to public interest.
And that was why we tried to carry out the inspection as early as possible. In fact, such prompt action would be fair to the owner concerned. But then you state in the prosecution criteria that high priority would be given to A, B, and C. But then concerning Mr. Henry Tang's case, he was contesting for the post of CE against another rival, and so it would be unfair. It was unfair to him. But I don't want to comment on an individual case, Chairman. So 5.35 states that default works should be carried out for a highly publicized case. I think it's important that all persons be treated equally before the law, but it seems that some are treated more equally than others. And then under 5.25G, after investigating that particular case, that you also inspect the UBWs in the vicinity. Of course, you may not want to comment on an isolated or independent an individual case, but then can you also tell us more about how you implement your policies in accordance with the criteria? In fact, in one case, the removal order was not issued, and in fact the owner took the initiative to remove the UBW, and the subsequent prosecution action was not about failure to comply with a removal order. So in fact there is a lot of room to maneuver on your part. So for highly publicized cases, for very famous persons, you can go beyond the 9 prosecution criteria outlined in 5.25, and you can take very speedy action. So there is plenty of room for you to maneuver. Director. No, these criteria and guidelines apply to cases where removal orders are not complied with. But then what about those who are willing to comply with your orders? Paul. But how can we interpret 5.25 and 5.35? Correctly? So you still have a lot of discretion to exercise. No, an owner may take action and comply with the removal order, and yet other owners near him do not take any action, and the owner of course feels aggrieved. So does it mean that you do connive at people who blatantly ignore your removal orders? Now there is no need for you to give an answer if you can't really give a convincing one. We do have these criteria for our staff to follow. But then these criteria are not cast in stone. For the 9 criteria in 5.25, some are more important than others. But I want to say that, in fact, our staff have to look at each and every case differently, and when our staff are in doubt, they hold meetings and they seek the advice of their supervisors. Who are their supervisors? In fact, we have different divisions, and each division is headed by a chief structural engineer or a chief building surveyor, and the supervisor gives advice to the staff concerned. So you issue removal orders only at a late stage, and you also register the removal orders at the LR after a lot of time has passed. But then for certain cases you speedily take action and also take prosecution action. I don't want to comment on individual cases, Chairman. I think that will fall under 5.35. But then, Chairman, 5.35 applies to default works. So 5.35 are the criteria for carrying out the default works, and 5.25 are for the issuing of removal orders. But in that particular case, a removal order was not issued, and very speedy action was taken. So under normal circumstances, you act in a belated manner. You do not act very speedily, but then in that particular case, you act in with super high speed. So people suspected that there was political motivation behind the approach adopted by the BD. Yes, Secretary, perhaps I can give an answer. But then for operational matters, these are within the ambit of the director, not the secretary. The secretary is responsible for policies only. Because Paul, you asked about a particular case, and operational matters are the responsibility of the director. Paul, do you have anything to add? Now, the Policy Bureau is not involved in the day-to-day operations and carried out by the Buildings Department. All right. I want to ask about 3.21 and also 6.14, 6.15. Leung Seng. 3.21, would you like to ask about it now or later? Chairman, concerning updating of the information system, this is not a controversial subject. The department has admitted that this is not the system is not updated enough, and there is a need to upgrade the system. And concerning the stock taking exercise, a lot of money was spent in that exercise, and the opportunity was not taken to differentiate between actionable and non-actionable UBWs in the system. Perhaps I can follow up later. Mr. Leung Seng. Yes, Chairman. From 2010 to 2014, concerning the targeted number of summonses versus the actual number of summonses issued, on the average, about 2,000 summonses were issued in a year. So, in other words, on the average, about 10 summonses were issued on each working day. And we all know that there are many UBWs in Hong Kong. So the percentage was only about 60%. That was not satisfactory at all. And then in 2013, 101%. In other words, you were able to meet the target, and you were able to even overshoot the target. And I think the Buildings Department should try to achieve its targets. We have over 68,000 cases of non-compliance with removal orders. And we're talking about a backlog accumulated over a 20-year period. Do you think that's reasonable? Of course, more resources are needed by the department so that more summonses can be issued annually. And concerning the idea of a fixed penalty system, may I refer to 7.13b. Now, this applies to the mandatory window inspection scheme. And 7.13a says that the BD will explore means other than deploying social service teams to induce owners to remove their UBWs. Will you also look at this issue in conjunction with the so-called reverse mortgage arrangement? Because elderly owners may not have enough money to remove the UBWs, but then the existence of the UBWs will have an impact on the safety of the buildings concerned. So I think you should look at this matter in conjunction with reverse mortgage. There are many owners who do not have the means, and through reverse mortgage arrangements, elderly owners will get annuities. And they will be able to remove the UBWs. And the removal of the UBWs will mean better safety for the occupants as well as those who pass by. So I just want to know whether you can think of making use of reverse mortgage arrangements to help the owners. I just want to say that, Chairman, prosecution action is carried out by the Legal Services Division of the Buildings Department, and in the past the Legal Service Division was staffed by mainly NCSC staff. In 2010, the funding for hiring NCSC staff was terminated, and so since 2010 we have been suffering from a shortage of staff resources in that division, and also some emergency incidents have occurred, and we have had to deploy our manpower resources to deal with those cases. But then since April 2014, those NCSC posts have been filled by civil servant colleagues. And so we believe that we will be able to achieve the target for 2015. In other words, at least 3,000 prosecutions within this year. 7.13 talks about a multi-pronged approach, including public education and also support and assistance to owners. Mr. Ng Leong Seng mentioned financial assistance to owners. There are at least 3 such schemes. First, there is the consolidated loan scheme administered by the Buildings Department, and through this scheme, owners can obtain loans from the Buildings Department, and the loans can be used for removing UBWs. Then there is a loan scheme administered by the Housing Society for elderly owners. And finally, there is another maintenance and repair works loan scheme for elderly owners administered by the HS and the URA. And so owners can approach the Housing Society or the URA for more information about these various loan schemes. Mr. Ng Leong Seng, let me follow up on 7.13b. The BT has introduced a fixed penalty system for the mandatory window inspection scheme. I want to know whether you've got figures as to outstanding payments for fixed penalty tickets issued. Yes, Chairman. Since the implementation of the system, we've issued a few hundred penalty notices. And about half of the owners concerned paid the amounts quite promptly. But then we haven't really issued too many penalty notices under the MWIS. And also, even if a fixed penalty ticket has been issued, if the windows of the premises have not been inspected and repaired, the case isn't regarded as having been concluded, and we may have to take further action, including going to the court. And so we'll have to really monitor the situation for some more time. Mr. Leung Sing. I have in mind UBWs which require urgent attention and removal. It is then I understand that there are the validation schemes, and there are financial assistance schemes as mentioned by the Permanent Secretary, and there is also support from the social service teams. But then many owners have financial difficulties, and they do not have the money to carry out the UBW removal works. So do you think the Housing Society and the URA schemes are sufficient to help owners in need? Is it that you think there is no need to resort to reverse mortgage arrangements to help these owners? It may take a long time to secure loans from the Housing Society or the URA, and we really do not want to see injuries or loss of life and limb because of delays. So apart from implementing these schemes, can you also think of other ways to help the owners? Now, under the Buildings Department's loan scheme, an owner may be able to get a low interest loan of up to $1 million. And concerning the HS scheme, it really depends on the number of units in a building. For an OC of a building with less than 20 units, the subsidy can be up to 30% of the work, subject to a ceiling of $150,000. But then the scheme administered jointly by the HS and the URA do not apply to the removal of UBWs. That's covered, and also, of course, maintenance works and other works.
So in terms of the procedures, do you think that they are good enough? Now, for the more urgent cases, it will be the Buildings Department which will do the default works first and recover the costs from the owners. Well, have you got any figures on the outstanding amount where you haven't been able to recover the relevant costs from the owners? Well, in face of urgent tasks, for example, UBWs and accidents like the one which happened recently in Wong Tai Sin, while they are treated as urgent cases and building safety is of utmost priority, we will do the work fast and recover the costs from the owners. Do you have any figures to provide to us? Can you provide us with the figures? Yes, we can do that. Alan. Thank you, Chairman. With regard to prosecutions, this is one of the more important tactics in law enforcement. It shows the government is determined to remove UBWs. I would like to follow up on paragraph 5.27. 5.25 lists the 9 prosecution criteria. The Buildings Department also has its own guidelines. And with whatever audit you do, you should have a basis. And one of the important bases is the BD's own guidelines. If you have the guidelines and you don't follow them, and then if there is no objective assessment criteria on whether the guidelines are followed, then it would do no good to the law enforcement efforts. Some members quoted examples of public figures, and the department said that it would not comment on individual cases relating to public figures. Well, I don't consider that a good answer. If you want to let the public understand how your mechanism works, very often you have to count on cases which raise the highest public attention to tell the public clearly how you deal with cases. So it seems that you are losing this very golden opportunity to explain the situation to the public. For Henry Tang's case, CY Leung's case, you are not following the strictly the guidelines. Now, concerning paragraph 5.27, it says that as of October 2014, of the 68,134 outstanding removal orders not complying with the requirement, only 9,680 have been referred to the BD Legal Services Section for taking prosecution action against non-compliant owners. So in other words, for 100 owners who have received removal orders, only 14% or 14 of them have been referred to the BD Legal Services Section. Is it the case that you don't have sufficient lawyers in your legal services section? Or is that you don't abide by any type of rules in doing so? Regarding the remaining 86% cases, the BD did not have information indicating the number of such cases meeting one or more of the 9 priority criteria for prosecution. So this is tantamount to what we referred to when we discussed actionable UBWs. After the stock-taking exercise, surprisingly, we didn't know which buildings belong to the actionable UBWs categories. You said that prosecution will be taken on cases meeting one or more of the 9 priority criteria. For 86% of the remaining cases, you didn't have any information on the number of such cases meeting one or more of the 9 priority criteria of prosecution. For, say, cases 3 or 4, no action was taken for as long as 10 years. So you didn't have any information on the number of such cases meeting the prosecution criteria. Chairman, the Director of Building undertook that he would present or submit a checklist to the PAC on the possible changes in the implementation policy so that the policy could be carried out effectively. So in his checklist, could he also deal with unclear prosecution situation? Could that be included in the checklist? Director. In dealing with the 68,000 outstanding removal orders, we abided by one principle. We would deal with those removal orders which had outstood for a relatively longer time. In our website, we made announcement on the different removal orders announced or issued in different years, and the target date for dealing with them. And of course, we would be dealing first with removal orders involving cases posing imminent danger. We set up working groups to deal with removal orders, and they would be abiding by that principle. The number of outstanding removal orders is very large. If we have to deal with these 50,000 to 60,000 cases one by one. So in the process of doing that, well, things might have already changed. So that's why we said that we want to target the priority cases first, cases which have been outstanding for a long time. And also in the audit report, some information has already been set out. For example, cases where there will be a high fire safety hazard and so on. So these will be the priority cases. Chairman, I want to point out to the director, well, time and again, I just said that there should be a basis for any kind of audit. And one of the bases is the BD's own guidelines. But then the director's answer just now raised the query or the question on the paragraph 5.25, that is, whether the BD guidelines should be reformulated. The director has answered, the director of audit, those aging buildings will be treated as a matter of priority. But then the aging buildings or removal orders which are outstanding fall into point H. But then H doesn't fall into the priority cases as set by the director to the director of audit. But then the government doesn't seem to be listening to myself. You can't preach one thing and practice another. I might not agree with you, but then you shouldn't be preaching one thing and practicing another. So the director of buildings, please think about this carefully. If you are going to submit a list to the PAC, a list of information, isn't it the right time that you should review your guidelines? Chapters 3, 4, 5, you mentioned a number of times the BD guidelines. Is it the time for you to review your guidelines? So much so that you practice what you preach. Or at least you should change what you said to dovetail with your guidelines. So say if you're going to do a review or audit 1 to 2 years down the line, then we have a clearer basis for doing that. Thank you, Mr. Leung, for your comments, and we will take this opportunity to review our guidelines. Director, in your reply to Mr. Chair concerning prosecutions, and also the Gen 10 you presented to us, well, there is a gap there. Please look at all the information carefully in Gen 10 and also in what you said to Mr. Chair. So please try to explain more clearly. Gen 10, because well, his reply differs a lot from what is stated in Gen 10. So perhaps you can go back and take a look and see whether you can make a clearer explanation. In Gen 10, 5.8, please take a look at paragraph 5.8. Can I supplement here? Because your answer differs from what is stated in Gen 5.25. Comes from Gen 10. But then what Gen 10 tallies with the audit report. But in Gen 10, when it is not laid out in the way as it is in 5.25A to I. In Gen 10, page 3, towards the bottom, C, long outstanding cases are mentioned. And that means long outstanding removal orders. And at that time, it is given a lower priority. But I must point out that this guideline was issued in 2011. And that was done after we dealt with a large number of UBWs. And in face of a great backlog of cases, then the long outstanding cases should be given priority. Well, you have read through this and you agree to the report, so please give an explanation how come that there is this discrepancy. Well, in the course of collecting the evidence, I've already noticed that. So that's why I asked the director, when he gives us this checklist, he can take the opportunity to review the guidelines which form the basis of this audit exercise. Perhaps he can do some explanations so that what he says tallies with the guidelines. Well, we may not agree with what you say, but at least such conclusions would not be drawn after the audit. The director said that the Gen 10 was issued in 2011. It's been some time since then. When the guidelines are actually applied to your operations, the guidelines are not adhered to. So that's why we are seeing all sorts of problems with during the audit. So, Director, when you submit a checklist to the PAC, please take the opportunity to look at the guidelines from the perspective of your actual operations. I want to finish with my question on Chapter 4. If you look at the two charts or tables, page 37, Table 3, progress of LSOs, LSO 3, 4, and 5, the target completion date, and the upper one-third of the page. For example, in LSO, July 2011 to February 2012, the target completion date is this period. And for LSO5, the last phase, it should be completed by December 2014. And today is the 26th of May 2015. If you refer to the number of target buildings below, well, the achievement rate is so very low. So for these 5 LSOs, not one of them achieves its target, and is each actually lagging very far behind the target completion date. And not mentioning the LSO1 undertaken by the BD there's been a delay of 3 years, and 59 of 101 buildings have not been completed. So there is no information on the target completion date either. So, Director, you can tell us here, perhaps today, how you will deal with the delay problem. The delays in LSO 1 to 5, and they have to do with rooftop, podium, lane, UBWs. Director, we admit that there have been delays in LSOs. As said, the number of target buildings involved is not just one building, but a number of buildings. The number of target buildings completed is not that large, but then for some target buildings, the works are ongoing. And it may be the case that there is one last unit where we have not been able to gain access, so that's why the completion date is held back. So we would review the situation on each case and see whether we can revise the target completion date. All right, we will look forward to that. In this same chapter, we have some information on subdivided flats. I have pointed out to the controlling officer. The BAC will follow up on the audit report and ask the administrative department to be accountable to us. The basis is that the administration has given us a good undertaking and accurate information. If you look at paragraph 4.19 and 4.20, way back the Development Bureau and the THB told us something. In July 2010, the Development Bureau informed electrical panel that the SDFs would give rise to the following problems: overloading the building due to additional structures, and water seepage, constitutional health hazards and environmental nuisance, and also obstruction to means of escape. These are very serious problems because lives are at stake. And in December 2014, the THB informed LegCo that according to a survey commissioned by the CNS department, it was estimated that there were 86,000 residential subdivided units in Hong Kong. In view of various concerns, the government would not introduce any licensing or landlord registration system for residential subdivided units, and that the building and fire safety of those living in subdivided units should under no circumstances be compromised. The BD would continue to step up efforts to eradicate SD use in industrial buildings and take enforcement action against building and fire safety irregularities of subdivided units in residential and composite buildings. So these are statements made to the LegCo. But then if you read paragraph 4.21, you would be confused. From 2011 to 2014, the building had conducted 7 LSOs on SDFs covering a total of 34,605 flats located in 1,092 target buildings. But if you look at Table 5, the second right column shows the original target completion date. LSOs 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. We have passed the original target completion dates. The earliest one is January 2012, 3 years ago, not completed yet. And when you read 4.22 per LSOs 6 to 11, a total of 10 consultancies have been signed, involving $12.4 million in total.
So the total amounted to more than $10 million in the consultancy fees. You can turn to page 47 for LSO 7 to 10. More than 50% were left uncompleted. I think it shows in the table we just looked at, and the audit listed them out clearly. About 70% were left uncompleted, and under paragraph 4.24, the audit is aware that the buildings department did not publish the actual number and percentage of subdivided flats found under LSOs on SDFs. So according to the Director of Buildings, this is not of public interest. I'm not sure how he reached that conclusion. Just for the record, I have a question for the Director. Facing the issue of subdivided flats, it was informed to the panel was informed of all these problems, for example, hygiene, fire hazards, etc. However, for LSO 7 to 10, they have proved ineffective, and you refuse to announce the actual number of subdivided flats and percentages. So how will you deal with the subdivided flats as a form of UBWs? For subdivided flats, if they are in serious condition, building integrity might be compromised. But in our inspections, from our experience, not every subdivided flat is in danger. Of course, the situation with subdivided flats in industrial buildings are different. In industrial buildings, the fire hazards are relatively high. So under paragraph 4.20, we mentioned that we would enhance enforcement in subdivided units in industrial buildings under page 47 for LSO 7, 8, 9, and 10. And the figures are as of 20th of August 2014. So it's around 6 months ago. And the number of uncompleted target buildings is 256, and the figure is down by 102. So it shows that under limited resources, our staff are trying their best. For LSO 7, 8, 9, and 10, no consultancies were involved, and the work was taken up by BD staff. So there were delays, but we did not give up, and under the difficult circumstances, we would continue with our work. Of course, I hope the buildings department will continue to work hard in the face of adversity. But the fact remains that you did establish certain targets. Of course, you did grant 10 consultancy contracts in other LSOs. So hopefully in the list you are going to share with us, you can make it clear to the members of PAC of your timeline. Unless you are going to re-announce a new policy. So on the basis of the government's existing policy, you have to inform the PAC of how you will use your resources or how you will secure new resources. And do you have any remedies to recover the delays? And under paragraph 4.24, do you plan to actually publish the number of percentage of subdivided flats? You said that it's not of public interest, but the fact is we are interested. I'm interested too. This is something the public needs to know. You have to disclose it. Some residents cannot afford to rent private flats, and the waiting line for public housing is extremely long. So this is something they have to know. If these subdivided flats are so dangerous, then they would go somewhere else. This is a very realistic consideration. If you put yourself in their own shoes, in the public's shoes, you cannot say that subdivided flats are of no public interest. You say that the percentage of subdivided flats to be observed is irrelevant, then you're not being realistic. For people who earn a few, who want to rent subdivided flats, they are looking for tips from the government, and they should know which flats to avoid. you cannot say that this is not of public interest. You cannot say the public is not interested. You have to justify yourself. Under 4.2, the Transport Housing Bureau and Development Bureau and made announcements in 2011 and 2014. So for the announcement 2014, was it about the long-term housing policy? Can you clarify yourself so members can understand, and this way we can come up with a more justified report. First of all, not all subdivided flats are illegal and in breach of the buildings ordinance. But if any contraventions are identified during the construction phase, then they would be identified as UBWs. The public would want to know about some subdivided flats with removal orders issued. Yes, I think this is a better way to put it. You can illustrate to the public whether the situation has improved from 2010. And when the long-term housing policy was announced, the government must be held accountable. And as Mr. Leung said, you have to clarify yourself on paragraph 4.24 for contravening subdivided flats waiting to be removed. They would that would be recorded under the lands registry, and as such, people who are interested in renting those flats would know. The information is updated online, right? So you can consider publishing that in your website. You cannot say that this is of no public interest. You have an obligation in terms of maintaining building safety. If it's substandard, then you have to take action. You should not allow them to exist. But now they are already, these structures are still here, and you are saying that the public is not interested. Before we draft our report, hopefully the director can give us the list as soon as possible. That would be very helpful. Paul? I'll be very quick. The meeting will end at 1. Do we need to extend the meeting? Perhaps. Okay, let's extend the meeting by 15 minutes. Under paragraph 5.7 of the audit report, certain crucial information are not covered. One, certain action dates, and B, and the properties which need to be removed, and the actual completion dates. The audit has no. Can you confirm those figures? When I look at the government's response under 6.7, you have nothing to address, right? Paragraph 6.18. In response to the Audit Commission, the government said that regarding those 3 paragraphs, you did not give a positive answer. Under paragraph 6.7, A to C, the target buildings of the LSO actions when the audit when the audit exercise was conducted, we did not have such information on progress in our system. But we subsequently updated our system to partially incorporate these functions. But going ahead, when we update our information system, we would have to incorporate certain useful functions. And under 6.7c, on the referral of removal orders to the lands registry, the dates are still unclear. Indeed, we don't have registration dates listed in our system of more than 200,000 cases. Only about 2,000 odd cases have the referral dates marked. So we would try to make the information available in the future. Starting from paragraph 6.2, you talked about the progress of your system. And in February 2014, the government, on the recommendation of the Government Information System Officer, you made an investment, and according to the audit recommendation, the new system can overcome some of the issues, right? Maybe I will invite the Deputy Director to address this question. Our new system would take the audit recommendations on board. In paragraph 7.9, sometimes removal orders are already made, and in some cases prosecutions have been done. In 2012 and 2013, respectively, well, in total, 4,600 summonses were issued, but only 3,047 UBWs had been removed. And in other words, 4,000. In other words, more than 2,000 UBWs are left unremoved. After removal orders and summonses were issued, still more than 50% of the UBWs had not been removed. So after the prosecution, would the government carry out default works? Or after multiple prosecutions, they would not follow up on that. In terms of the prosecution, we have cases with multiple prosecutions, and as the figures showed, prosecution is not a surefire way to force owners to remove UBWs. We would issue warning notices as well. And as we mentioned, a lot of manpower and time are involved, so we would only carry out default works under special circumstances. Paragraph 7.9 only refer to figures from 2012 and 2013, but by simple comparison, 56% of the cases, the UBWs had not been removed after the first prosecution. So can you share any figures on the second, third, and fourth prosecutions? And if they still fail, and if these cases are not qualified for default works, what are you going to do? Or are you just going to ignore them? We can provide further prosecution figures. We can share the figures from 2012 to 2013. We issue tens of thousands of removal orders every year, as you know. For the first year, around 15 to 20 of the owners would remove their UBWs voluntarily, and with the passage of time, we would not the compliance ratios of the compliance percentages of the removal orders would drop. In 2012 and 2013, our prosecutions were mainly targeted towards owners who refused to remove their UBWs after a long time, and so the percentage of 56 is not bad in a way, and since we do have some very stubborn owners, hopefully they can provide figures on the second prosecutions. According to the law, upon issuing of removal order, apart from imprisonment and fine, the maximum fine is $20,000 per day. So when the court deals with these cases, would they always appoint or impose this daily fine? Or would they impose extra penalties on non-compliant removal orders? We would inform the courts on the outstanding period, and in past cases, the court has issued a lump sum penalty. We can provide figures on the detailed breakdowns. Of course, we cannot affect the court's decision, but in terms of policy, as far as I know, some courts would automatically determine the owners guilty, and they would come back on another occasion to determine the penalty. Would that be a more effective measure against the illegal owners? We did have some such practices in a recent case for an industrial building in Chun Wan. The owner was determined guilty, but the penalty was not yet determined. For owners who ignore the first prosecution, for those 56%, I think this might be a more effective means of doing it in the future. I don't know why more courts or judges would follow this practice, but is this a direction we can go? For re-prosecution cases, the penalties would be higher. That's something we can tell from experience. And over the years, we have spent $2.39 billion, and the figures have gone up by 67%. But the number of removal orders have decreased by 54%. So from a value for money perspective, this does not sound efficient. So hopefully you can pay attention to the efficiency of your work. If not, let's wrap up.
Mr. Alan Leung mentioned one point about a policy, and when I gave a reply, he was not in the conference room. I just want to tell him that, in fact, this policy will be reviewed. Right? Perhaps you can give us a paper on your proposed review, and I believe the review may be on the macro aspects of the policy. Right? If we need further information, we'll write to you, and as we need to write a report, please give us the papers that we've asked for as early as possible. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.